I'm Alex with Extinction Rebellion. And then this is Deanna.
Also with Extinction Rebellion Kentucky.
We live here in Louisville, Kentucky.
We'll catch up more later. So, guys, Miriam, Justin, Bill, and Joe as well. Like, tell us who you are, as in, how did you get to your cross the threshold moment, and what do you sort of define as your cross the threshold moment?
Bill, you want to go first, since you're in danger of losing your signal?
Okay.
Yeah, alphabetically.
Okay, starting with B. All right, good. I'm Bill, and I'm broken down on the side of the road in our Backbone Campaign's action truck that has 99% biodiesel in it, but it's been sitting for a bunch of time, and that's not good. So it's anyway. I grew up on Indian reservations until I was 12, and so I think that was actually part of the impacted me pretty deeply, and I still think Indigenous leadership and all the things we work on is really important. Okay, we can come back to that. I had done activism for a long time, from like high school and college, and after college, and then I spent some time down at Big Mountain doing solidarity work against relocation. I did anti-nuclear stuff, anti-interventionist stuff during the 80s. And I went and studied social ecology with Murray Bookchin in like 88 up in Vermont at the Institute for Social Ecology. And then I moved to Vashon Island, Washington, in late 89. And I kind of took a break, honestly, from activism. I did other stuff. I, grew a garden and learned how to build a cabin, and then I got into the arts, and I was playing drums and doing percussion and studying that and having a good time doing that stuff. And then the Bush 9/11 happened, and then the Bush administration, and what I felt like I was always angry and yelling at somebody else. I wish I complaining about what other people were doing or not doing, and felt like it was. I use the metaphor of like being a musician on stage and playing music. If you go up on stage and what is it? It's like, if you have to go up on, you have to play music with a sense of authority. You have to, not authority like you got it mastered, but like with a true sense of listening. You've got to, but it can't be a process of doubt. You can't be engaged. You can't be obsessed with your self-doubt. And I think that sometimes people are afraid to get involved because they think that maybe they don't know enough and let the experts do it. But then we all get that frustration. The experts aren't really doing it for us. And so the thing in music is, if you just have to listen to the impulses you have to trust that the practice and everything you've done, all the preparation, is going to manifest in the moment once you listen and you follow that thread of your inspiration and what your gut is telling you to do. And the rather than worry about what the audience is thinking or think, oh, I'm going to do this clever thing. You've just got to come from the heart and the gut, and you've got to work, do your best. And of course, you got to prep. So for me, it was a natural transition to go from an improvising musician to using the communication skills or aptitudes of artists, and combined with my artist friends. And we started an organization called Backbone Campaign, and it's inherently about paradigm shift. And paradigm shift is partly greatly about the climate crisis, and because the climate crisis is a crisis of paradigms and how we treat the planet and treat the world and our lives and everyone as if everything's for sale, and really when nothing of actual importance should be for sale. And so I delved into that, and I've been full-time on that for 18 years. And I honestly feel very privileged to be able to do that. And I've always done that with the support of my creative community and my actual community, my family, and lots of other folks who I collaborate with. So it's always a collaboration. That's a lot. Check.
Thanks, Bill.
Will you repeat the name of your campaign again? You broke up a tiny bit.
The organization is called Backbone Campaign.
Backbone. Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot. And that's a great intro and talks too about, advice for people who are coming up on their own thresholds. So cool. Joe, you're up in the alphabetical.
Miriam, why don't you go next? Because I think let's follow through with the people who are in the film, if you don't mind.
Fair enough.
Sure, I'll go next. Age before beauty, right, Joe? Okay. Well, my name is Miriam Kashia. I live just outside of Iowa City, Iowa. Born and raised in Iowa. Grew up with good Protestant ethics from my Methodist minister father and my grandfathers and my uncles and my brother, a whole mess of them. And I learned to love nature at a very early age, camping trips and just playing outdoors all the time. I retired as a psychotherapist in private practice in 2005 and went to Namibia in Africa with the Peace Corps for 2 years and 3 months. And that was a life-changing experience. As the Peace Corps says, it's the hardest job you'll ever love, and it was. And I really realized, living on the edge of the Kalahari Desert, what kind of environmental challenges people in the world have. Even back then, before I heard much about climate change. But I've been a member of the Sierra Club for 50 years or something, and I was following the changes in the environment and what they were talking about, and I was getting more and more concerned. And in about 2013, I went on a junket to Nebraska with some friends to help protest this thing called the KXL pipeline. And we went to a place in Nebraska where they had built an energy barn with solar and wind, and it was an educational site more than just a barn on the path of that pipeline. And what I learned there and how I got energized there really maybe was my step outside the box moment. And I came home and started looking for ways to get more involved. And not long after that, I joined a group called the 100 Grannies for a Livable Future, which is a local group of activist, elder, wonderful women, and whose motto is educate, advocate, and agitate. And I'm the key agitator, just so you know. And then I ran across this thing called the Great March for Climate Action. And within a minute of hearing about this project, which was going to walk across the country to raise awareness about the impending climate crisis, I decided to do it. I was 70 years old at the time, 71 when the march started. And I thought, well, I can probably do that. So I did. And it what's the word I want? It radicalized me. What I saw, what I learned, walking through sacrifice zones and walking past humongous fossil fuel plants and so forth. It was eye-opening and world-shattering for me. And I haven't ever stopped since. So I walked every step from California to Washington, DC, over 8 months, about 7 million steps. And I've been going ever since. In addition to the 100 Grannies, I belong to the local Citizens Climate Lobby activist group and several others. I've been arrested 4 times. 3 of them in Iowa fighting the DAPL pipeline. I went up to Standing Rock 3 times and got involved there. So I've done a lot and learned a lot and care a lot. So I guess that's enough of an introduction.
That's a great introduction. Thank you. And then it'll come to Justin. We wanted to bring some local flavor onto our panel, and we're trying to build community in Louisville and help people in Louisville to sort of move beyond. A lot of us have sat in a lot of public hearings and watched super duper smart commentary from 98% of everyone there opposing XYZ thing, and then they do the other thing because they were always going to do the other thing. And similar, we had a climate strike march, and then the Metro Council agreed to 100% renewable, and the mayor declared a climate emergency, and they've basically done not much since making some declarations. And so we wanted to sort of bring attention to what's going on in Louisville and talk a little bit as Kentuckians too. So Justin, tell us what you see as sort of your cross the threshold story.
Yeah, I'm so honored to be here and be a part of this. Let me just quickly say who I am. I'm the sustainability coordinator here for the University of Louisville. That's what brought me to Louisville in 2009. But right before that, Miriam, I was a Peace Corps volunteer with my wife down in Paraguay. We served for 3 years, and that's why I'm still addicted to drinking mate all the time. That was a very wonderful experience. It was a culmination of going through graduate school to study what sustainable development really means. And it was a life-changing experience in many ways. But my crossing the threshold moment actually came relatively early in my life. It was 1989 when I left my front door with my dad, brother, and a friend on our bicycles. And like Miriam, we crossed the country under our own power. Now, we didn't do it to raise awareness except within ourselves of what this country is and who lives here and how vast it is and what is our own capacity to get across it under our own power. So at 15 years old, I come back home. All of my friends are taking driver's ed and getting driver's license. And I'm thinking to myself, clearly in crossing the country, I crossed a threshold that I'm never going to do what everybody else does. I'm just not going to get a driver's license. And I never have. And I've lived in many places around the world and always figured out a way to live without a car. And that started my process of closing some doors to open up new ways of thinking, creative problem solving, new ways of seeing the world, right? When you choose to live without an automobile, it puts your life in a certain box, right? There's things you just can't do, which is okay with me. In fact, I love it because there's a lot of things you can do, and you find how life affirming those things are. And so I started saying no to a lot of things. I still don't carry a cell phone, which some people think that's even more radical than not having a driver's license. I just need to put some parameters around my life and take some control. And so I don't need to be plugged in 24/7 and reachable 24/7. I have telephones, I have internet when I need it. People can reach me if they want to, but I say no to certain technologies, which I think goes back to a long line of sort of resistance, philosophical resistance. I'm a Quaker, and we practice radical love in our daily lives. So Quakers have been known, of course, for being engaged in activism, but also living activism. So that's why you see things like Quaker schools. Quakers were some of the first ethical businesses, ran some of the first ethical businesses in the US. Quakers were some of the first abolitionists, right? We say no to things that we know are wrong. And I say no to fossil fuels. I say no to the private automobile. I say no to the clothes dryer in my home. Why would I want to blow up people's backyards in Appalachia, to spin a turbine, to make some electrons, to come over a line, to spin my clothes, when I could take a second to walk outside and hang them and let the sun do that work for me, right? So some people say you're not achieving what you could possibly achieve if you just, went with the flow and got yourself a driver's license. Think of all the places you could go, right? But that's not at all the way I wanted to find my life. And so for me, crossing that first threshold was just the first step to trying to live in radical love. And every day is activism. Every day I get to seek ways to cause no harm.
And I really like the way it connects to something that Miriam says in the film. you say, Miriam, like, you know, that you're sort of inspiring people at home to say what they can do in their house, in their community, in their state, and in their world, because we really do need the action to take place in all these spheres and in all these scales. Joe, I still do want to hear from you just shortly. Just tell us, how did you decide to make this movie?
Well, I've been making documentary film and television for over 30 years. And I made mostly television for a number of years with some film thrown in there. And then at some point, I did documentary television before there was such a thing as reality television. I did the series Taxi Cab Confessions, and many people think that that kind of inspired reality television in some way. But in my early years, they left me alone to do documentary television. And as time went on and more people were doing reality television, they wanted me to do that. And I think it's the opposite of documentary, and I didn't want to do it. And so at some point I decided to quit doing television and only do social action documentaries. I also was committed at that point to raise the money myself to do the films. So I sort of had two huge jobs. One is to raise the funds and the other is to make the films. And I made a series of 3 films, American Winter, first on the economic downturn, about families that were falling out of middle class into poverty. Then one on stem cell research and regenerative medicine called Ending Disease, which I made sort of simultaneously to this film on people fighting climate change. I spent 6 years making this film. I think it was the most difficult film that I have made. I'm not sure exactly why. I think that it took me a while to find the right people. My type of filmmaking I call life in progress, where once I find the subject, I just sort of fade into the background and let their life progress organically, and then create the story in the editing. But it takes quite a bit of trust for the person to just be completely open and natural in front of the camera. And so I followed a number of people for years before I kind of found out exactly what the story was, what the type of activist was that I wanted to follow. And I spent the first couple years on this feeling like I was going to follow anyone who had, a passion for fighting climate change. And that could be, anything from a scientist to a journalist to a professor to an activist. And as time went on, I decided, no, wait a second. A scientist could be coming up with some alternative energy solution because they think they're going to make a fortune. So I don't know if they're really 100% committed to this cause. And then you have journalists and you have professors and such. And I was following some really, inspiring folks, but I felt like they were making a living fighting climate change. So I said, wait a second, let's not follow those folks. I want the people who are in the trenches, committed to do whatever it takes, even if it kind of doesn't make sense with their careers or their family or whoever else, that it's against all odds, but they're doing everything they can. And then I still had to find the right people with the right passion and commitment, and mainly they're the right people in the sense that they're open to the process of living their life, pretty openly and honestly in front of us, very openly and honestly in front of us. And so it took a while, and I finally found the 5 groups that I followed over the period of 3 or 4 years to make this film. And then it took us about a year to edit it. I edited it with my son, David, and my other son, Nathan, did the music. So as you know, Corinne's in the other room. She does all the tech and the social media and the website. So we never have to leave the family to get things for this film, luckily.
Family
All we
affair.
can afford is our family, though.
And family ends up being a really huge theme in the film. And also, you were talking about sort of finding collaborators and how what it took to find them. And that's something that I was really interested in, because I felt like the film really zeroes in on each individual person and maybe one close family relation for each person, but doesn't give as much of a picture of the groups with which they're working. Like the climate walk was a little bit more, you had a more broad representation of several people who were on it, because I guess you were like traveling with them and that would happen. But like with the valve turners, you see Michael's story and sort of don't get the picture of like, how did that collaboration come to exist and how did they decide that they were going to be able to hit those 4 points simultaneously. I hope guys, Michael makes it on. He's traveling and was calling in by phone, so he may yet join, and I'll ask him that question. And related, like Bill with the kayaktivists, how did that, I'm interested in these collaborations because I feel like the victories that we will have will involve this kind of team finding. And I feel like I'd like to see more of that or learn more about it.
Let me address that a little bit, because I have to say that the main reason I made this film on people fighting climate change, because I've been following climate change and getting more and more overwhelmed by how little is being done compared to what needs to be done. But that being said, I felt that the climate change films out there in general try to tell you all this information about how bad things are and how much worse they're going to get. All that information is true, but to most people, and certainly to me, that information is so overwhelming that I almost can't bear to watch it. So I make a certain type of documentary that follows these people in general, and you're drawn into the person's life and the person's relationship, and then you start to get involved and inspired by the issue. And I think that is sort of an interesting way to get into a subject, because especially in this country, everything's controversial. People look at a film and right away they're like, am I against that or am I for that? Are those people on my side or are they on the other side? But if it's subject oriented, where you're drawn to this person and you're sort of in their lives, and then by kind of being with them for a while, you're drawn into the issue, then people who maybe might have some resistance to this subject because they're not sure that it's their point of view, they can watch it and then begin to care about these people, and then begin to care about this issue, and then they almost don't know that they that they were brought into it. And that's happened with all three of these films, which have controversial aspects to them.
Yeah, that's really interesting and part of a strategic conversation that I definitely want to have, which is so part of the strategic conversation is about like, what collaborations are we working in? And so Miriam, I'd be interested to hear more about the 100 Grannies. And then like Bill, I'm interested in the backstory of the teamwork behind that kayak brigade. And then I think that there's more strategy questions around engaging people who aren't engaged that Joe was just hinting at that we'll come back to.
So did you want to hear from me?
Yeah, Miriam.
Okay, I want to say first, I don't think I've ever told you this, Bill, but I'm a kayaker, and I've done a lot of kayaking and canoeing. And I got to Seattle the day after the kayaktivist event, and I was so disappointed.
Oh my God, that sucks.
But I was there in time to get involved with the Shell No rally, and I saw the big polar pioneer monster out there in the bay. And so every time I see those kayaktivists, I think, oh shoot, I wish I'd have been there. Anyway, to your question, Alice, which was collaboration. Since I walked across the country, I like to say it bought me a ticket to talk. And I've given maybe 50 talks to groups and organizations and churches over the last years since I got, that's sort of tapered off because it's old history now that I walked across the country. But one of the things I always say to groups, well, several things I always say. One is be yourself, find your own niche, find where your passion is and do that. And don't try to be somebody else. Everybody else is taken. But I also tell them, don't try to do it alone. We all need to find our people. We all need to find the people that we can work with. And if you try one group and it doesn't fit, find a better one or a different one for you. So that's been my modus operandi. I belong to several groups, and I belong to some I'm not active with because I only have so much bandwidth. But the grannies, the grannies were formed about a year before I went on my climate march. So that would have been about 2012 or 13. And it was founded by a local woman who was an Episcopalian priest. And she wanted to do something about climate, and she wanted to engage women, and she wanted to engage elders. So she called a bunch of women she knew together to her home, and they had dinner one night together and they talked about it. And by the time that dinner ended, the 100 Grannies for a Livable Future was born. And ever since then, we've called that the first supper.
That's beautiful.
And we operate by teams or committees. We have a plastic bag committee. We have a activism committee. That's kind of my bailiwick. We have a diet committee. We're encouraging people to use a plant-based diet. I mean, we just have a whole slew of committees so people can find where they want to plug in and what's most important to them and what trips their trigger. So yeah, find your people.
I love that. Thanks. And I want to just let people know. So Michael Foster's just joining us now. Michael, we've done a sort of intro, kind of like, how did you get to the place where you crossed your threshold? And what was it, to introduce ourselves. And then we were also just talking about collaborations and an interest in, where the film is very zoomed in on individuals and their families, sort of like getting a sense of like, how do we participate in activism collectively? So that's about to come to you, Michael. And then I also just want to let the audience know, so this event runs to 8:30 Eastern time. And so, we've got an hour still to talk to each other. And the basic plan is I've got a few more across the whole panel questions that I'm going to lead. And then you guys in the audience should be putting questions into the chat on Eventive. So on the Eventive page where you're watching this stream, you can post your questions. Corinne's relaying them to us, and Alex and Deanna will bring them to the panelists. So it's a little bit of a relay system for tech reasons, but it's going to work. So please post your questions in the chat. It works better than telephone because, copy paste. And Michael, hello. And just talk to us a little bit about how you got to take your big threshold crossing step and the crew you're working with.
Hello.
And I can't hear you. Now it shows you're muted. *6.
There we go.
You hear Michael?
Maybe while Michael, why don't you just interrupt me when you're ready to go? And that, just to keep the flow here, just building on what Miriam was saying, that, when we started the Backbone Game, it actually started, it wasn't called that. It was just some friends who got together for potlucks once a month. And we decided that we were concerned about the direction the country was going at the time. And we were doing festivals and stuff with giant puppets and things. And so it was, we had time, we had a variety of skills in our community, and we just tried to figure out what we could do. And so that was the genesis of my activist organization, and I think there's a lot of brilliance in that, and just getting together with the people you love. I mean, I think that was really affirmed during COVID, right? Is those connections, and then keep thinking, keep discussing. You know, what can we do? What can we do next? Yeah. If I hear Michael, are you on now?
Yeah, I think so. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You're good.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Sorry. Go ahead, Bill. I'm gonna mute myself again.
Okay. Well, then I will get to some of the other sort of points that Alice was bringing up prior to you jumping on. And so first of all, I do think working from where you're planted, grow where you're planted. Working from your community, to being yourself. I love Miriam saying but everybody else's part has been taken, so it's only your part. So be you. And the thing I love about artful activism and what we do is that, you know, I have old codgers who come in and do soldering once a week, you know, and they make these panels and they hot glue. And one guy's like literally got one eye and uses can use a hot glue and a magnifying glass, and everybody has something to give. Somebody likes to fly drones, or somebody else is a puppet maker, someone else is a sculptor, whatever. So everybody has something they can bring, and it's not everybody wants to write postcards, and not everybody wants to get arrested. So figuring out how people can enter from the place that they are and grow into that. And then that's how I think we then lean into the next phase of engagement of whatever we do. I will say that the anti-fossil fuel fight in the Pacific Northwest feels like it was somewhat unique. I mentioned the tribes before, but I will reiterate that right now, that whether it was coal ports and the Lummi Nation leading the way there, or it was oil exports and the Quinault or leading, or the Quileute, or the March Point and Swinomish leadership, or the LNG terminals and the Puyallup leadership, or now the Snake River dams and the Nez Perce leadership. Just over and over again, that you can find, I think, a home or a direction. If you pay attention to where are the indigenous people putting, where are they putting their energy? Where's their focus? And the Pacific Northwest, the non-indigenous, non-native community like me, I think we found our niche, you know, is supporting and sometimes doing our own unique version in the ways that we could. And there was a number of fights that led up to things like the Shell No. So like the Shell No, the Shell had been actually, they had a similar drilling rig in Seattle in 2012, but we hadn't been practiced. We hadn't been together, meeting each other and learning skills to build our resistance by 2012. Backbone Campaign hosted a series of about 10 years in a row of action camps. And I think that just, you know, those were always collaborative with other organizations. But convening people is very powerful, and convening people to share skills and information and strategy, and then to execute some action that you do at the end of like a week of doing that work, leverages that unique capacity to prepare and to plan and to then execute with a significant group of people. So we did a series of those, and early on, like we had learned that being on the water and using kayaks was powerful. So when in 2015, when the Polar Pioneer came to town, people were fighting it in like the Port of Seattle meetings. And I called them, some of the organizers up, and I said, you know, since 2009, when we helped shut down an industrial gravel mine, and part of using kayaks, we've been practicing like what can we do on the water? One of the principles of art of war is to have a variety of skills, have a variety of tactical tools, so that your opponent doesn't necessarily know how to respond. If we always do the same thing, it's easy to train our opponent to know how to shut us down. So they said, yeah, sure, we could, that would make sense for you to do something on the water. So we started training people and announced that. And it's very complicated, but we knew that people weren't going to just get in kayaks and be in front of a giant oil rig and refuse to move, just without when they get a phone call. So we had to first take it really seriously that water is dangerous, and especially where we live, the cold water. But also, so there was a training for safety and the training for learning how to do visuals on the water. But also, the first action we did, the one that Miriam's talking about, I think, if we're talking about the May 16th action in 2015, that action was a family-friendly rally on the water. And the pictures look like we're all blockading an oil rig, but we weren't. It wasn't going anyplace, but we knew that we had to get a picture of people looking like they were blockading in order to convince them that they could actually do it. And so later on, and some of the footage in the film is from when the thing really did untie. But at that point, there was some grandstanding by a national organization that kept us from mobilizing our local people who had trained, and it was deeply disappointing. But honestly, what moved Obama was the thing we did on the 15th that looked like we were resisting the thing. So I don't really think that that's an adequate overview of the story. But yeah, there were lots of groups involved. Not everybody was on the water. Not everybody felt like they could be on the water. There was a lot of tension about privilege and who can be on the water, who can't be on the water. We tried to mitigate those things, but you can't ever mitigate everything. And sometimes you just have to trust that you're doing your best and go with, and check your gut, check your heart. And I'm really glad we did stuff on the water. But we also made sure that the indigenous leadership was present and in the front. Check.
I really appreciate that overview that really gives a more picture of the story, and it totally makes sense. I think making it family friendly is so important because we really do want to make it accessible to more people. And so yeah, I really appreciate that turned out to be useful.
At least at access point, at least I don't, everything should be family friendly. I don't want to come off like that.
Yeah, I got kids. Like, what am I going to do with them? Yeah, totally understand.
Right. But before you escalate, you need to practice, because when you are in an escalated situation, you need to really have your center, and you can't have your center if you're on your learning curve in an escalated situation. So everything, whether if you're going to have to be on the water at night, that's what we had a luminary procession so that we could learn to do logistics on the water at night. Awesome. I mean, you just have to practice so that you can keep your center and stay grounded when things get weird like they did in Portland. And that was not family friendly on the water in Portland.
Yeah, I totally got that. And the fact that you were doing it for action camps for 10 years before it makes a lot of sense. And, I think that line 3 is generating another, again, coming out of Standing Rock, is generating more generations of action camps and relations and collaborations. So good to hear. Because, I mean, it makes sense the Northwest is kind of in a different place than the rest of the country, frankly. And yeah. So, but Michael, let's hear from you just at least an kind of introduction to how you got where you got, and then how you picked what you picked to do. How did that, or even better, like how did the world choose you to be in that spot? Is another sort of way I've framed it in my own head.
Okay, if you can hear me. I first heard about climate change in freshman high school debate was handed a copy of the report that Dr. James Black delivered to the executive directors that said that in 1978 that humanity had about 5 to 10 years to learn how to wean itself off of fossil fuels before it would face dangerous consequences. I was like 13, 14 at the time. And I thought it was insane that it was impossible that humans could alter the planet. We were too small, like ants, and God would never allow it unless it was God's plan, in which case, let her rip. So that was no introduction at all until 10 years later. I watched Dr. Hansen of NASA testify to Congress in 1988 and say exactly what I knew the Exxon scientists knew 10 years earlier, that it was an emergency and that we'd wasted all the time we had. Since then, I've been a green consumer, doing my part, signing petitions, showing up for parades and protests and hearings, and most of it has been motivated by giving up, by realizing that there is nobody who can handle this. And my nemesis, climate governor Jay Inslee, is the living proof of that, because I was involved with the children's lawsuit here that has been compared to Brown versus Board of Education. It was the first time in U.S. history that the courts directed the government to fix climate on behalf of living citizens so that they may grow to adulthood safely. And the governor wiggled out of it, and he undermined that ruling. So that kind of made me want to turn off the pipeline. We'd submitted legislation based on the science needed for climate recovery. Unless you've maybe heard me talking, you may never have heard of what we actually have to do and how quickly to get climate recovery in place by 2100. I was really thrilled when Dr. Hansen came to my trial and was ready to testify on my behalf. And I got to drink a beer with him in the hotel bar and talk about his research and talk about where we're at, in specifically the year I was in trial. And I'm still stunned by the fact that there is no politician who can say out loud in public what must actually be done, the required minimum in order to allow life to make it through this century relatively intact, or I can't even say that anymore. It's too late for that. Make it through this century with a chance of things getting better someday in future centuries. That's where we're at right now. 95% of endemic species on the planet face extinction this century. We know that. So no politician can say we need to cut emissions 25% this year and every year, and we need to plant 1 new tree for every 3 trees alive. They can't say that and still be politicians. Business leaders can't say that and still be business leaders. This is all bringing me back to the pipeline. It's all bringing me back to the idea that your group is Extinction Rebellion. And if it's going to be a rebellion, it has to stop things. It has to actually physically stop things. So one of the drivers of the pipeline action was to actually physically stop something and to show that a handful of people could stop, whatever it was, 15% of the U.S. daily consumption. With 5 people in bolt cutters, and yet even that turns out was a symbolic action, because we all waited to get arrested and then went around telling people what we did, thinking that other people would copy us, and there were only a handful who did. So if a protest is going to be successful, there has to be sacrifice. The person has to be willing to sacrifice. There has to be a disruption. There has to be an interruption of business, whatever that is. And it has to be persistent. We cannot go home at the end of the day or the end of the week, because then business will continue. So I'm hoping that all this leads up to some kind of general strike where people say, I'm not going back to work until my work stops making the stuff they make. And if we ever manage to get to something like that, then we can begin to protect our children. And until then, I think we're making a lot of noise and keeping ourselves busy and making ourselves feel better while we waste the last few months and years when we might make life on Earth possible. We could make a future history. I hope that answers.
I really feel you, like, and I feel so deeply alienated from most people around me because I'm like that too. And I know in the movie you say, like, I don't want to be the guy in Times Square with the sign that says the end is near, but like it seems to be my, destiny. And I resonate with that so much. I've been looking a lot at deep adaptation stuff, and they're talking about doing what's right come what may. And I also was looking at all the stuff around Resnicek, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, but that people analyzed her actions, and when you get right down to it, their property damage was worth like 1/6 of 1% of the budget of that pipeline, and so it's still symbolic.
Alice, I'd like to speak about Jess because I know her personally. I would
love to hear more on this.
In case everybody doesn't know what you're talking about, a young woman who's now 39 and another woman who's in her late 20s now. The two of them paired up, Jess Resnicek and Ruby Montoya, in Iowa, trying to stop the construction of the DAPL pipeline. It started in North Dakota and went to Illinois and then to the Gulf and exported. All that crap that's killing our planet. And Jess and Ruby damaged some pipes and some machinery. And they never were caught, but they decided to make a public statement. And they stood in front of the Iowa Utilities Board that actually issued the permit for that pipeline across Iowa, 3 people on that board. And they confessed. And they called a reporter and they said, we did this and here's why we did it. And they were subsequently arrested. And about a week ago, maybe a week and a half now, Jessica Resnicek was sentenced to 8 years in prison, which makes what happened to you, Michael, look like a walk in the park. Makes yours look like a walk in the park, which I know it wasn't. And she has
mine was pretty much a walk in the park.
Yeah.
I did 6 short months, and I'm ending my probation in another 6 months. So it's been like 5 years of this, but I've been free most of that time. What we did was also small potatoes. They delayed a pipeline for a full, whatever, I think it was 3 or 6 weeks. And we managed to shut off some pipelines for a few hours. So it was a huge big deal what they did. It was amazing what they did. And it was nonviolent what they did.
And the worst part of it, the judge has labeled her a domestic terrorist, which is one of the reasons this beautiful young woman with a heart of gold got such a high penalty. I was part of an action along the Mississippi River when we were trying to stop the pipeline from going under the mighty Mississippi. Imagine a pipe breaking under the Mississippi and the ramifications of that.
And we're at it again up in Minnesota.
And we're at it again up in Minnesota, right. Anyway, Jess was co-leading that action. About 100 of us went up and surrounded this humongous drill that was drilling under the river. And some of us got arrested. And I got arrested along with 4 other grannies that were there that day. The oldest one was, I think, 83, and she crawled under the fence, bless her heart. And we prepared for trial. I think this is a really relevant story to what we're talking about here. We prepared for trial. We pled not guilty. The grannies did. Most everybody else who got arrested that day, I think 30 people did, pled guilty, paid their fines and went home. But we pled not guilty, got ourselves a lawyer who happened to be on the Iowa City Council. And we were in the car on our way down to our pretrial hearing when our attorney called us and said, turn around, go home. They dropped the charges. And I, to this day, believe they dropped the charges on our trespass charge because they did not want to see the headlines, 5 grannies are on trial for protecting the Mississippi River. They did not want that to happen. So they got rid of us. We wanted to go to trial and have our say.
And what
I
about
really-
the woman who got 8 years? Have you spoken with her since she got sentenced?
No, but I haven't. I haven't any way to contact her, but she put out a beautiful interview, 20-minute interview with a Des Moines Register journalist, which everybody should see. Everybody should see it. And if you Google Jessica Resnicek interview, you might find it.
There's a really good piece in Grist too that outlines the whole story.
Yeah.
And that's where, you know, I'm getting stuff like that. You know, the Dorothy Day quote is in that Grist piece. We must be prepared to accept seeming failure, for sacrifice and suffering are part of the Christian life, and success as the world determines it is not the final criterion for judgments. Because people were saying, you know, well, you delayed it a couple of months, you know. And I think that brings us to this question about how, you know, what is a symbolic action compared to a real action? They burned up a couple of dozers and a cat and a big excavator, and it was still just like a rounding area that insurance would cover, like to the pipeline company. So it's a really tricky question. How do you become real rather than just symbolic? And if anybody's got anything to say about that, open in the floor, and also invite in the people who are watching online to pass up your questions, because it's we'd love to hear from some people on Eventive.
I would love to jump in. I for just a sec, I do think, to restate, delaying the operation of a pipeline that's moving, you know, 1 million barrels of oil a day, delaying that by weeks is real.
Yeah.
If we could do that on major pipelines, like the one that was just hit by ransomware, you wouldn't have to hit too many pipelines too often to make it real. The ripple effect would be immediate and tremendous. I'll say this, the Reverend Fred Smalls said that the U.S. economy is as entangled in fossil fuels as it was in slavery in the 1850s. Having said that, I think it's easy to imagine that it will be just as difficult to disentangle this economy now from fuels as it was to disentangle from slavery in the 19th century. And so if there's any terrorism, any weaponry or killing involved, you can imagine what sides people are going to want to choose. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about nonviolence. We're talking about property destruction. We're not talking about weapons and people. We're talking about going into a war zone unarmed and being vulnerable.
Yeah.
We are the oppressors, stopping ourselves from killing ourselves. And we can't do that with weapons.
And I think you're really right about the depth of entanglement. I'm really appreciate that quote. And Justin, you and I have been talking, you know, some previous to today about the depth of entanglement and nonviolent strategy. But Michael, I really appreciate the position that you're coming from. And Justin, I'd be interested to hear a little bit of your reflections on that depth of entanglement and the difficulty of disentanglement.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It just, since we just came through Juneteenth, I was imagining there might be some community somewhere that has to wait 2 years to learn that we've moved beyond fossil fuels. But yeah, I totally agree with what Michael's saying, and that's why the struggle is so vital right now and was so vital years ago, right? Like the sooner we get started in this process of disentangling from fossil fuels, the more likely we are to save more species and as well as our own, right? And so it's vital that we get started in every way possible as early as possible. And yes, there are direct actions like stopping pipelines. There's also disinvesting from these companies. Everyone who has a retirement account of some kind, right, is probably invested in fossil fuels. Every university, right, that has a foundation. It doesn't have to be that way. We can choose to invest in what we believe in. Another big theme for me is how the media itself is entangled with corporate interests and fossil fuel interests. Even our beloved NPR, right? It's ridiculous to hear the underwriters for NPR sometimes, and you think, could this possibly be an unbiased source? And that's why I helped start a community radio station here in Louisville in 2017 called Forward Radio, and Alex and Deanna were just on my program, Sustainability Now. And this touches back to an earlier theme that was talked about earlier in the evening. We're really sort of asking a question: how do we get beyond our bubbles, and how do we reach people outside of the choir? Not that the choir doesn't need singing to as well, but I really believe in the importance of broadcast media. And social media has really wrapped us up in some of this, entangled us in our own bubbles of communication. And so providing megaphones for community voices in a broadcast media, I think, is one example of how we can take back control of something like the media, so that the actual truth and actually things of importance to our community, who gives a crap what the Dow is doing, right? Like, we hear it like how many times a day? What the Dow is? Are you kidding me? This affects no one, right? Like, yet how much carbon is in the atmosphere affects everyone on the planet. And do you get updates on that ever in broadcast media, right? So these are kinds of ways that we need to take control. We need to grab the reins of power, and it can be, shutting off a pipeline, but it also could be creating broadcast media that is controlled by the community.
That makes sense to me as a step in the direction. I see Bill has a thing to say, and then I'm going to pass it to Alex and Deanna to bring up some questions from the audience. So, Bill?
It's a very provocative collection of things that have just been said. So one, I think that it's very powerful, very important that the difference between what we do and what the mob at the Capitol did on January 6th is that we threaten no one's safety. We threaten no one's well-being. The sacrifice is the danger that happens is accepted upon our own self. I think that's a really important pillar of nonviolence, and it is super important because I think that's how we draw people in as well. So I think that we are in a cultural, we have to shift culture as well. So I think we do not want to underestimate the power of COVID as a teacher that the status quo is not inevitable. And I think we have to really do everything in our power to hold on to that thread, that lesson. And we're not out of this pandemic, obviously, right? But we kind of, some forces want us to make us think we are. I also think that we don't need everybody to be the exact same kind of activist. Okay, so Diane Wilson, the wonderful woman from Texas who's done all these hunger strikes, she said recently to me that Thinks everybody needs to get 2 weeks in jail. That may be the case, but for the other time of their life, I don't think they all need to be activists. I think that the importance of what Joe does as a storyteller is both external. It tells the world that this is happening, and it's also reflects to us how we look and what we're doing and who we are and how we're connected to each other. So it spurs on conversations like this, to feel that we're all part of something bigger. I think that the starting the radio station or starting a co-op or anything that's sort of it takes the leaks of wealth and time and equity that leave a community into the capitalist system and returns them to the community is worthwhile and important work. Community organizing, cultural work around anti-oppression or connection to place, that's important work. We don't all have to be campaigners. And I don't think we should be, and we think we should force everybody into that box. And I think if we see others as change agents, I think that the key is that we should know that whatever we're doing, it's full-time change agent. And that we should be communicating to each other and locking arms as part of a common narrative. I really believe that that policy follows culture, and the right wing knows that, and they shift culture first, and then the policy follows after that. I think we need to do the same thing. I think we sometimes do the same thing. We are doing the same thing, but if we're going to, and the last thing I do also come back to you got to cost the system. You've got for it to be real as part of this question. I don't think symbolic acts are unreal. I think that when you draw people to the cause and you get them to re-engage to do their work, I mean, the kayaktivism was symbolic, but it was also real. So, but I do also think you need to be able to cost the money. You need to be able to interrupt commerce. You need to be able to stop business as usual. And then, but simultaneously as you stop business as usual, you have to be building the alternative, because nobody wants to follow people off an abyss when they don't have a vision for the future. Check.
All right on.
Are you guys ready for questions?
Joe's got his hand up.
Yeah.
I was going to add one thing to that. So my goal with this film was to energize people to get involved. And I tried to find folks who I could follow as the subjects in this film who had that passion and commitment that's contagious. And I think I succeeded in this wonderful group of subjects that I chose to put in the film. But I agree with Bill that everyone doesn't have to contribute in the same way. Some people are not willing to get arrested, but they're willing to go to a demonstration and maybe, block an entrance in some way, but not get arrested. Other people aren't really good at leaving their house and would rather have a blog because they're, the type of people that are not much at going outside. But I do feel that there comes a time where we have to show the power of numbers. And, just like the first, weekday after Trump was elected, the Women's March came, and just millions of people went into the streets all over the world. I think that we have to do that. When, we were, Miriam and I and others were at the New York big march. I think they called it the Climate March. It was more of a parade. There was 400,000 people there. I thought, wow, this is so energizing. Why don't they do this every month in a different city? And I mentioned that to a few people that I had a connection to who had organizations. And, I don't think there's been another one like that. And I think it's such a waste. I think that politicians will listen to numbers. And, a lot of activists feel like we don't need the politicians, but eventually, we need to get governments behind this to put, huge resources and regulations in place. And that happens when huge numbers of people get into the streets. So I was very, very lucky in that a number of top climate leaders that ran top organizations endorsed this film. And lo and behold, I had their emails suddenly. So I wrote to them all and I said, why don't you guys do a huge march in another city every month, and it'll grow, and it'll make a statement. And to be in San Francisco the next month, Houston next month, Boston, and maybe one month won't be huge, but who cares? The person that's in that march might have never gone on a march before and will suddenly get energized and feel like, wow, I'm a part of something big. I want to do this again. And I couldn't get any traction. So anyway, my goal with this film is to get people in the streets, to get people to make a statement. Doesn't all have to be the same statement, doesn't have to be arrested, but to get people to take a stand for a livable future.
Hear that. What else we got coming from the audience?
Okay, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. So Diane asks, if you were to plan a multi-day march, where would you start? And that's just a general question to anybody.
I'm going to add that Diane's crew is working on a march in the Ohio River Valley. Like they want to do a multi-day climate walk kind of thing. And we've been talking about sort of toxic tours. There's a proposal to radically expand the petrochemical corridor on the Ohio River Valley. And so, yeah, advice on planning a climate walk type thing. Yeah, what are any tips from some pros here? We would be interested to hear them.
Miriam?
Well, let me tell you, it's not easy to plan a march. The one I was on, they were aiming for 1,000 people, and we ended up with an average of 35 or 40. You need somebody to do logistics. You need somebody to do planning. You need somebody to organize the press. You need to be able to recruit people. You need to be able to, if it's a multi-day march, you need to be able to put people up or have a place to camp or whatever. There's a lot that goes into it. And a lot of it is about logistics. Figure out how you're going to handle the logistics, and then figure out what's the best goal for what you want to do. If you can't cover the logistics, don't even begin, because it won't work. And I suggest that you get more traction if you march through cities where there's a lot of people, or large towns where there's a lot of people. We marched through huge towns, and we marched through the countryside in front of fossil fuel plants where there was nobody, and we were doing actions there, but nobody saw us. When we marched through city, hundreds of people joined us. There were a whole lot more of them than there were of us. And you need publicity ahead of time, and you need to make it a democracy. Can't have some old white guy leading it. Just
So
saying.
you kind of already touched on this, but there is a follow-up question of, from your experience, what would you do and what would you not do in planning in the action itself? Does anyone have any other comments on that?
Well, I'd just like to step back and say that tactics are things we do, but tactics serve strategy, and strategy is to achieve a goal, and goals to serve vision. So I don't think it's really awesome to start with the tactic and then try to make it fit into a strategy, a goal, and a vision. I think that that doing the understanding what the goal is, at least, maybe we can't articulate the entire vision, but understanding where does the thing that we're trying to achieve, what's it going to get us a little bit down what are we trying, what's the purpose, and then thinking about, well, then how do we match the purpose to the tactic to the purpose, rather than create a purpose, try to do a tactic and then try to find a purpose. So I think I think that's a thing. And if the purpose is to grow the movement, for instance, like what are you celebrating, or if you're trying to grow some aware. I'm sorry. I just think that tactics serve strategy, strategy serve goals, goals serve vision, and that's, I think, important to keep.
Totally makes sense, and I think that you're probably missing some like context to do with this crew from the Ohio River Valley, but we don't have to get. But thank you for that critical reminder to start with the vision. And they actually had a conference recently, or last year, was Better Vision for the Valley. And like we've written to the Appalachian Regional Commission saying, like, you know, what you claim to be doing in your strategic plan and a renaissance of petrochemical plants on the Ohio River are not compatible. And, you know, so there's a bigger infrastructure around it. But I think Diana had some logistical questions too, and appreciate both of you a lot.
Right. Well, you know, I guess one thing I would ask is then, are you collecting stories from people that you meet along the way? You know, how are they feeling like they're part of it? And then, so what is there something that's accumulating, not just the blisters on your feet, but that's accumulating as you build from one thing to the next, one day to the next. And then I would have support. Yeah. Then there's just. Grounding it in purpose and having a way to make that purpose crystal clear to the people around you so that they can identify with it and want to become part of it, and then feel like you're moving their vision and aspiration forward. I think that's I'm more on that area of work.
Thanks.
Michael, are you looking to talk? I see your.
I would love to jump in.
The next question is actually directed towards Michael. Someone asked, in your opinion, Michael, what is stopping others from stepping forward and stopping things?
I think risking freedom, it's an unknown. Like, you know, I could have been charged with, I was originally charged with as much as 81 years total risk. And then at trial, I think I was still facing like 21. I ended up getting, 1 year inside, and I served 6 months of that. But the idea that like they want to throw the book at us. And I think that most people think about, okay, well, what's the maximum that I could face? And I got to tell you, it was a serious thing that I thought about, spending the rest of my life in prison or being on the outside and being an activist. And I think that's a big question for a lot of people. Most of the kinds of things that people are planning and organizing and risking these days are more like misdemeanors or like local municipal infractions, that kind of stuff. Anyway, stopping stuff. I lived in Louisville for about 7 years. I loved it. I did a bike ride, a 200-mile ride around the Ohio River up to, Cincinnati or something? And can't remember exactly. And so when you said that, my first thought was, cyclists wearing gas masks, like, Josh Fox or something. Maybe some boats at the places where the pollution gets spewed out of those factories, and focusing on those locations, because when I grew up in Houston, Texas, if anybody stops and points a camera at a petrochemical refinery, goons immediately appear, like within seconds. It's insane, and they will just take you. So show up with a crew. In fact, the guy did this in my hometown, showed up with a video camera, pointed it at the Shell refinery, and within a few minutes, he was taken away. His comrade in this, his friend, was like, at home streaming or whatever, saw this happen and went, okay, I got to figure out where they took him, what happened. So he went down and did the same thing, and within a few minutes, he was gone. And they were both taken in for questioning, because it's national security infrastructure, even though it's a private corporation. So anyway, I would take advantage of that leverage and say, okay, let's get a big group of people, some indigenous folks, let's get some babies, let's go over to the gates of the refinery and let's point the cameras at the refineries and force them to do something about it. The actual penalties there for photographing a refinery can't be that serious, but it would be a great way to get your spectacle noticed. Anyway, so I can think of all kinds of variations on that depending on what your goals are. I know this is XR. This is a rebellion you're planning. And I really appreciate that the people in your organization, however many, however few, are wrestling with this question of, how do we stop things, and what are we going to have to risk? And I think that's the beginning, right there.
We're close on the end of time. So we've got, it looks like Miriam has something to say, and then maybe pick one more question, Alex and Deanna, and then we have sort of like a closing question we want to ask everybody. But real quick, what do you got, Miriam?
Yeah, it is quick. I just wanted to add that the judge that gave Jessica Reznicek 8 years, in addition to calling her a domestic terrorist, said she was giving her a big penalty to make sure nobody else would ever do this. And these laws are being passed all around the country because we are a threat. And we can be effective doing the things that Bill and Michael and all of us have been talking about. And the reason we know that is because they're reacting in this way. That's all I wanted to say. It's working.
Yeah, they used an obscure easement rule to blockade the entire road into Camp Namawag, where we were staying in Minnesota in March. They're like, oh, you don't have a proper transfer of easement. Your road is closed to vehicular traffic. So they're pulling whatever they can. So like you said, we must be doing something right. All right, what do you got, Alex and Deanna, in the questions department?
This one is from Bugs, asking if there's a crew prepared to support Ruby and Jessica while they are in jail.
What do you know, Miriam? I bet there is, but what do you know?
I know Jessica and Ruby have a ton of support here. They were part of the resistance coalition against the pipeline, and it was a large collaborative community with lots of organizations and lots of people involved. They'll have lots of support, and we don't know yet where she's going to be sent. She doesn't know yet, at least when I last heard. But she will get a lot of support, and so will Ruby. I don't know when Ruby's going to be sentenced, but probably within the next month.
I have to say, this whole thing, like the conversations about jail, always, I have this like twinge, because like I'm just surrounded by people who go to jail. Like everyone on my street goes to jail for drugs, like, or child support, or the neighbors across the street just got arrested. Like the dad, it's like normal for people to go to jail. And like everyone in your movies, like going to jail is a big deal, and a mother going to jail is going to have a huge impact. And it was like almost offensive. Like it was offensive to like me and my partner, because like women get arrested all the time, and the only thing that happens is their kids get taken. So, by the way, the U.S. government does not give a shit if mothers go to jail. They, like, you die. It's not a problem. Just throwing that out there. Now, I know that we are down to the end, and I really wanted to give everybody some time.
Can I jump in on that?
Please do.
I gotta jump in on that. I was treated so well. If anybody saw that movie, The Shawshank Redemption, I had not seen it, but everybody in jail kept telling me I was like the librarian character. And in fact, I became the prison librarian while I was there. But the idea that like I was treated so completely differently, like some kind of monk or holy man, because I basically did the right thing and waited to be arrested. And that friggin' blew everybody's mind. They couldn't wrap their brains around that. And so jail was a very different experience for me. I don't know what it's like to go to jail.
Not jail, prison.
Prison.
You weren't like in county, because county jail's a nightmare compared to prison.
It is a nightmare. Absolutely. I was only in there for a couple of days, but the
Yeah.
idea that, that my experience of it was completely different. Like Gandhi said, it was his temple. I kind of felt liberated because I knew why I was there, and I wasn't, a scapegoat. I made a decision, and I felt like I was on the right side of things. And so my experience of that time was pretty great, even though I was in a hellish place, a
That's really
stupid
interesting.
place. So
Yeah.
I just needed to say that out there. It is very different what we're talking about.
Well, and it depends on where you end up. I mean, like if you might be an indigenous woman who's strip searched and you caged and then put in county and then stuck in county and then, it's just, I see Bill's mechanic friend is about to get there to work on that truck, so he's got to go. And I want to ask everybody, starting with Bill, what does winning look like? Because I think that's a good place to end when we're talking about, strategy feeding vision. So I want everybody to get a chance to say, sort of, what do you think winning looks like? And pick whatever time scale you want.
Well, I think we need to celebrate constantly as part of building a culture of celebrate all kinds of things as victories. Now, I don't want to be Pollyannish about it, but I think that we if we're waiting to celebrate until we reach some utopia, we're never going to get to have that party, and then nobody's going to want to join the fight to get there. So Michael's brought up the term rebellion for Extinction Rebellion a couple of times, and I think that rebellion is a muscle that needs to be exercised. I think people you need to lean into your discomfort. So I just want to make sure that and then it becomes less scary. There is also a dispute around. Sometimes, like Abby Hoffman would say, that the secret to being a revolutionary is getting away with it. So I don't think that we all want to necessarily be jumping into jail, except for, I would say that we want to make sure that people of privilege are in the front of the line to get into jail and to spend some of our privilege. I am really compelled by, in terms of like, what does victory look like? Victory looks like starting a local credit union. Victory looks like starting a community choir. Victory looks like a land trust housing or land trust farm. Victory looks like a free bike program or ways for people to not have to drive, blah, blah, blah. And I'm really also into the bigger, like, infrastructure victory. I think railroads where people and stuff is moving for regional and local economies. And that honestly, I want to nationalize the freaking Class 1 railroads, the big railroads, and put them in service of building a local economies rather than just exporting in a kind of anyway. So global, I think alternatives to globalization, whenever we can localize, people are talking about reshoring now, supply chain resilience. I think getting a true cost and expressing true costs of what are the choices that we make, and having that be part of our community discussion and setting priorities. I think that's part of at least the road to victory. I think more time and less busyness and better food and more sleep and more love and more music and more paying attention to the hazelnuts and the huckleberries. I think that's what also, growing some potatoes. For me, victory looks a little bit like that.
I love that, Victorious. Current, present. Thank you. All right, Joe, you're up.
Well, I personally think that in this country and around the world, the vast majority of people acknowledge that climate change is creating and will continue to create an enormous crisis. We are in a country that is one of the least democratic countries imaginable, but certainly on this planet. We have this illusion of democracy, but very few people are able to, there's very few people and a few corporations that have the majority of power in this country, and they're able to, create vast disinformation and obstruct what the will of the people is. For me, we need to solve climate change, but in order to solve climate change, we have to do something about voting rights, and we have to do something about the lack of democracy and institutional racism and injustice in the justice system. So I think that the vast majority of people are behind the fight to do something radical around climate change. And there's, corporations and powerful self-interests that are stopping that. And I think passing this Voting Rights Act, if we could get done, and doing things that would, move this country towards a real democracy would go a long way towards letting us have a chance of solving this issue.
Hear that. Thanks a lot. All right. Sticking with the alphabetical theme, it's Justin, and then Michael, and then Miriam closes us out on the what does winning look like, Justin?
Yeah, I want to move to Bill's victorious place. That sounds really awesome. I think winning involves changing the conversation. I think if we get to a place of victory, we're going to find that people aren't talking about should we move off fossil fuels. They'll be talking about what should we do in our community, what makes the most sense for us. True conversations about sustainability that don't leave other people behind. So winning has to have justice component to it. It really has nothing to do with what the elite do. It's the least among us. How are they being treated, and how are they being involved in the conversation? Do they have a role in the conversation? So those are all parts of a victorious landscape, right? A new conversation. But I feel like we had glimpses of what winning might actually physically look like during the pandemic. Nothing to do with people getting sick, but just suddenly people like radically changing behavior overnight. And suddenly our city being much quieter, there being no planes in the sky and very few cars on the street, and wildlife returning. For me, that was magical. I mean, it was weird because it was in the context of a scary pandemic, but it was magical to see that radical change can happen. We all can band together in the face of a challenge like a pandemic. So because of that, I am absolutely convinced we can do it to get beyond fossil fuels and the other sustainability challenges in front of us. So the pandemic has actually given me a lot of hope.
All right, you believe that we will win. You believe that we will win. And what happens to the least among us, which I really appreciate. Okay, so it's Michael and then Miriam, and we're in our last minutes of this panel, Ems.
Hey, yeah, Extinction Rebellion, right? Started with 3 demands. Tell the truth, because politicians cannot, and until the politicians and media do, people don't realize the emergency, the scope, and the time frame, and they will not take the emergency actions necessary. Bill McKibben wrote an article a few years back, winning slowly is losing. Unless we get below 350, near 2100, we're toast. It's going to get worse between now and 2050 for sure. We might become ungovernable by then, easily. U.S. Army College predicts mission failure for the Department of Defense within 20 years because they won't be able to fight battles. They won't be able to get water to soldiers, those kinds of things, to do their job as a Defense Department. So, I mean, like on and on, it could get worse and worse and worse. for climate to get better, all of the things Bill and everybody's mentioning can and must happen, absolutely, or not. If we don't stop fossil fuels immediately, they won't. Extinction Rebellion's demand number 2 is carbon zero 2025. Watch any of Roger Hallam's videos. Just watch the most recent ones from 2021. And you'll understand that, yes, we do need people in prison. We need hundreds of people in prison at the same place for the same reason. And we need to be persistent. And he does a much better job explaining it than I could ever. So a vision of winning, strategy of winning, civil disobedience that creates the spark of a visible emergency, a visible disruption that forces people to choose a side, period. And if there are enough people who believe in science, enough people who believe in, the basics of what's happening to our physical surroundings, the droughts, floods, fires, you name it, then maybe the Civil War will go our way. And I don't mean that we're taking up weapons. We're not. We are sacrificing ourselves. We're taking the risk on. We're putting ourselves in harm's way in order to create a confrontation with all of those people who would say, we can do this the slow way. We can do this over time. We can create alternatives. We passed that time 30 years ago. What's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago, because you need a tree, not a seedling. We need a tree. We need 1 trillion trees. 1.2 trillion would be better.
And to stop cutting down the good ones that we have and then grinding them up into pulp and pretending that it's green energy.
Bingo. And in Kentucky, the biology there is incredible, especially over in the eastern part of the state. Mitch McConnell is an easy target. Coal, of course, you've got all kinds of things to stop. No end of good targets in sight. So I wish you all the very best at starting your own regional rebellion. Thank you.
Thanks for the wishes and blessings. Miriam, send us home.
Send you home. Well,
I'm already home.
I'll just say amen to all of the above. But I think for me, I can say it fairly succinctly. We hear a lot about tipping points beyond which we cannot recover on this planet when we are essentially doomed. And for me, winning is we reach a tipping point of hearts and minds and justice and democracy and awareness of intersectionality first. That's the tipping point for me. That would be winning.
And that if we reach that tipping point, even as the ship is going down, the civilizational ship, and we know that as the civilizational ship is going down, like, we're taking so much of life on Earth with us, and that's happening. And it's a question of how much of us can get through this like terrifying bottleneck. But if we reach that tipping point of hearts and minds that you mentioned, Miriam, then at least like the people going through the bottleneck and getting to the other side can bring through, we can hope, an ethos of being the gardener instead of being the pillager. So,
right.
So much love and appreciation to you all. And I guess we are signing off. This recording will be available on YouTube to share around the world to your friends or whatever from here on out. And yeah, we just really appreciate you guys being here. Thanks so much.